And folks, I agonized over that prediction for the Pinstripe Bowl for a long time, for about as long as I agonize over any prediction, which wasn't necessarily 3 hours. It might have been 3 minutes, but still, I agonized over who to select to win the new era Pinstripe Bowl between Wisconsin and Miami. And then about 12 minutes into the game, I realized, Mark, it was right there in front of you. Fortunately, I made the right call in the end, but don't overthink it. Malik Rozier starting for Miami, Wisconsin, and their bowl success under Paul Chryst, a Wisconsin team that is going to show up prepared to play, ready to play, is going to take advantage of whatever the weakness is on the other side. And then Miami and what they become under Mark Richt, which I did not forecast or anticipate when he took over this program. When he took over this program and led them to a bowl victory for the first time in 12 seasons in defeating West Virginia, and then 10 consecutive wins to open 2017 and a recruiting class that ranked in the top 10 in the country. Despite not winning a national championship at Georgia, winning big for the most part at Georgia, Miami fans were happy to have Mark Richt. Miami fans were hopeful for the future. Miami fans saw the progress in recruiting. They saw the progress on the field. Yes, they didn't necessarily like Malik Rozier at the time starting and didn't like the collapse at the end of 2017, but the future looked bright. 1 year later, the future does not look bright for Miami football, relatively speaking. A program based on tradition, based on past success, based on recruiting footprint in South Florida should be able to be the best team, the best program in that division, no question. I'm not even calling for dominance in the ACC Coastal Division, which is arguably the worst division in college football, but I'm calling for prominence in that division, not to allow the Georgia Techs and Dukes and Pitts to win the division over and over and over and over, not to win one division championship and then get mauled in the ACC championship game by 32 points and then follow that up with a season in which you beat no one good. Who is the best team that Miami beat? Miami beat Pitt. They beat the team that won the division. They beat a team that lost the ACC championship game by 32 points. They beat a Pitt team that lost 6 games. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, following Wisconsin's demolition of Miami 35-3. It was more brutality than it was spectacular, explosive play from the Badgers. It's what we get from Wisconsin football. And despite a disappointing season for Wisconsin, coming off 13-1, ranked in the top 5 in the nation to conclude 2017, with hopes of getting to a college football playoff, with the expected best team in the Big Ten Western Division that would trounce its way, bludgeon its way to Indianapolis in the Big Ten championship game, with hopes of defeating an Ohio State or Michigan to get to the college football playoff, despite the early loss to BYU and then disappointing efforts against Northwestern and against other teams like Penn State, and late in the season against Minnesota, losing by 22 points to the Golden Gophers and giving up the axe, the Paul Bunyan axe, given up to the likes of Gopher for the first time in 15 years. Wisconsin still somehow salvages the season with a bowl victory. People remember bowls. I know that the players are starting to discount the bowls, especially if they have NFL aspirations or they have injury concerns. And the public, many of you college football fans, disdain the bowls because of the exhibition type quality of them, meaning that we see half-empty stadiums or we see 90% empty stadiums. And we also see situations in which there's really nothing to gain, seemingly. There is not a championship on the line. There's not a foreseeable end goal as there is in the regular season, that we're playing games to determine who wins a conference championship. But people remember bowl games. Think about your team, your favorite team, and what games do you remember? What games do you remember besides your rivalry games? Despite and in addition to those games that decided division championships, conference championships, or were very attractive non-conference games, teams that you rarely, if ever, play in September, you remember bowl games. I remember bowl games. Bowl games are important. I will always hold fast to that. Anyone watching college football watched Wisconsin and Miami play. Anybody who was watching any kind of football in the last 3.5 hours was watching Wisconsin demolish and brutalize Miami. That's unlike the Florida State game for Miami. That's unlike any other division game that they play. That's even unlike, well, going back to the LSU game, in which that was exclusive, of course, to a national TV audience on a Sunday or Monday night, Sunday night. Bowl games. People watch bowl games, and they remember bowl games. Call them exhibitions, call them whatever you will. They do count against a coach's record. They do count against the team's record, and they are factored into the final ranking. There are only 4 teams playing for a national championship. Everybody else is playing for another win, another higher ranking, and playing for prestige in the eyes of the public. Playing for pride as well. I will check out the live chat. This is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I appreciate all the kind words, the success that you've given us here in recent days. The rate of subscribers has risen considerably in the last couple of weeks. The number of views, the number of comments, but especially the subscribers has gone up considerably. People are catching on to the voice of college football and what not only I provide, but what we all provide as the voice of college football. The self-proclaimed best chat room in college football right here. Let's check it out. And I'll remind you that the phone lines are open at 860-325-3687. 860-325-3687. We can talk Wisconsin, Miami. Earlier, Duke with a huge second half, scoring 42 unanswered points behind the arm and the passing of Daniel Jones, defeating Temple 56-27 in the final game. Well, the only game for Ed Foley in his interim status, once again, doing what he was asked to do 2 years ago as a Temple assistant, and that's take over for a coach leaving for a Power 5 school. 2 years ago, Matt Rule. This time around, it's, of course, Jeff Collins moving on to Georgia Tech, and Manny Diaz, who we saw on the sideline for the final time for the Miami Hurricanes as defensive coordinator, taking over at Temple. But the Owls, after jetting out to a 27-14 lead, were bludgeoned. I use that word with Wisconsin. It doesn't really fit for this one. They were routed. Duke took advantage of a Temple secondary that was not up to the task of TJ Roming and company. We can talk about the college football playoff. I have just released videos today highlighting Oklahoma's quest to upset Alabama and Notre Dame's quest to upend and upset a 13-point favorite in Clemson at the Cotton Bowl. We had Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football join me to talk Oklahoma, and also Ben Belden from Slap the Sign talking Notre Dame. I've also got my college football predictions, and with a Wisconsin win over Miami, I am now 12-1. 12-1 straight up, and I am 10-3 against the points, against the spread, 10-3 in bowl play. Let's check out the live chat. And the number is 860-325-3687. We will take you up at least to kickoff of the final game of the day, the Texas Bowl, with Vanderbilt back in postseason play after missing last year at 5-7. And of course, Baylor only won one game last year. They improved by 5 wins this year, which is the highest total in FBS under Matt Rule, going from 1-11 to 6-6 to make a bowl game. Baylor and Vandy and the Baylor Bears are a 4.5-point underdog against the SEC's Vanderbilt Commodores. The first appearance for the SEC this season. Let's see, the Big 12. Who has played for the Big 12? Who has played for the Big 12? TCU, of course, played last night. They defeated Cal 10-7 in overtime. We did a post-game analysis on that. Please check it out. We're in our post-game analysis of these teams. We did a few group of 5 teams like Fresno State and a few others that don't come to mind right now. Buffalo and Troy and a few others. We projected more so than just talking about the bowl game and what happened in terms of an instant analysis or recap. We projected toward 2019. Who's coming back? Who's being lost to graduation? And what is the out-of-conference schedule and the big games for 2019 for each team? All right. In the live chat, we've got Coach Blocker dominate the trenches. Ridiculous game. Coach Blocker dominate the trenches. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. You, my good sir, are apparently a Miami fan. Noah Iverson, Big Ten domination continues. Well, let's not get too smug, Noah. I know it feels good. That is 2 routes for the Big Ten over the ACC. And the reason I like the bowl matchups is because unlike the games that we get in the non-conference schedule in September, these are like-seeded matchups. Minnesota finished about halfway down the Big Ten. I'm not going to go through the exact seedings in my head right now, but they placed about just in the same position that Georgia Tech. If anything, Georgia Tech was 5-3 in the ACC and Minnesota 3-6 in the Big Ten. So actually, the Big Ten had a big disadvantage there in terms of seedings in that particular game because the only teams that finished ahead of Georgia Tech in the ACC, Clemson and Pitt, 8-0 and 6-2. Syracuse, who went 6-2, and then after that, it could be argued that Georgia Tech was the 4 seed in the ACC, and Minnesota had all sorts of teams ahead of them. Northwestern, Wisconsin, Iowa. Ohio State, of course, Michigan State, Penn State, like 7 teams ahead of them. Minnesota was about the 8th seed in the Big Ten, but they killed Georgia Tech 34-10 as a 6-point underdog. Wisconsin was a 2.5 to 3-point underdog against Miami. Of course, they killed Miami 35-3, and Wisconsin was 5-4 in the Big Ten, and Miami was 4-4 in the ACC. So again, a like-seeded matchup. So that's what I like about bowl play in terms of comparing the conferences. Throw out motivation. We cannot conjecture on motivation. If you're not motivated to play, don't play. Don't come to the game and play. Don't make excuses that you weren't motivated. Are you an athlete? Are you a competitor? Then be motivated to play. Come to play. Don't lose and then say we weren't motivated because we have such bigger aspirations to go to the college football playoff or to play in bigger bowl games than what we made, what we earned here this season. Therefore, we weren't motivated. Well, you know what? Then you're not a competitor, but don't make excuses. So I understand the people that say, well, we really can't take the bowl results and make too much out of them in comparing the conferences. Yes, we can. There were a few different words that were going to fly out of my mouth there, but yes, we can, because we can hold the coaches, the players, the programs to the standard of there is a game scheduled. You have a large paycheck. You have the nation of college football watching you show up and play. Don't make excuses that you have bigger aspirations and you're let down to be going to X bowl game. And therefore you weren't motivated, and therefore you can't be held accountable for the results. And therefore, well, this particular team lost, but, you know, they weren't motivated because, of course, the other team was much more motivated. You know what? You're a competitor, show up and play. If anything, these are the most valid results because they are like-seeded teams from the conferences playing each other. Let's see, for example, Oklahoma. Who did Oklahoma play in the Power 5 non-conference? They played UCLA. UCLA went 2-7, maybe 3-6 in the Pac-12. UCLA was one of the worst teams in the Pac-12. They did not make postseason play. They didn't make a bowl game. They went 3-9, 3-9 or 4-8. And that was Oklahoma's game against the Power 5. So to say, okay, the Big 12 went 1-0 against the Pac-12, that doesn't put the game into context. But in the college football playoff, Oklahoma will be, as the number one team in the Big 12, be playing the number one seed in the SEC. So that is a fair fight, and that is a reasonable game to judge the two teams and, by extension, the two conferences. We could go all the way through the line of games. Washington ended up winning the Pac-12. Auburn wasn't even close to winning the SEC. They had Alabama and LSU ahead of them. They had Mississippi State tied with them, maybe superseding them in the Western Division standings. They, of course, were buried in the standings on the other side by Georgia and Florida and Kentucky. So Auburn was really like a fifth or sixth seed in the SEC, but they ended up beating in week one Washington. So that's a big credit to the SEC, taking their fifth or sixth seed and beating the number one seed in the Pac-12. And again, as I mentioned to somebody earlier in a live stream that we did earlier today, who was asking for me to compare conferences or rank conferences, that's what I do during the off season. I take all the results of the Power 5 games against each other, which includes, of course, the games mostly in September and in the bowl season, and then other games. And I take those results, I seed the teams, and then I go through a full formula that I will explain, or you can look it up, what we did last off season, and it makes sense. So hear me out. I am not saying that there is not motivation or lack of motivation in football or in sports. There definitely is. If we could measure it, that would be one thing, but we can't. We don't know. We're conjecturing. There absolutely is motivation in every game. This Wisconsin-Miami game, we have no idea. If we could put some kind of a detector on each player, we could measure the motivation. And when they hit the field, when they ran out of the tunnels, we'd be able to say, well, Miami's got a 63 out of 100 motivation factor for this game, and Wisconsin's got a 67. So it's pretty close. So we're really not going to weigh the factor of motivation for this particular game. Or they could have come out of the tunnel and we said, you know what? Miami's cold. They don't want to make this trip. They're not really feeling it. They were disappointed and upset that Mark Richt chose Malik Rozier as their starting quarterback. They're not feeling really confident or motivated, and their motivation factor for this game is a 10 out of 100. For Wisconsin, they want to erase the memory of a bad season and make up for all the games that they lost in the Big Ten and finish off strong. And they have a strong work ethic and motivation, and it's 92 out of 100. We'd be able to say, okay, well, at the end of the game, the result was Wisconsin won, and part of that had to do with motivation. But we have no idea what the motivation is. Yes, motivation exists. I just choose not to try to conjecture on who has it and who doesn't and try to measure it. If anything, I give more credit to the teams and the athletes that are motivated to play and fall short. Auburn was a bit embarrassed by UCF in the Peach Bowl last year because, of course, they were from the SEC and they were a favorite, and UCF, quote unquote, did not belong playing a big time team, and Auburn came that close to winning the SEC championship game. Then Auburn lost to UCF, and people made excuses for Auburn. From what I remember hearing out of the Auburn players' mouths, they did not make excuses. They said, we got beat, which I credit them for, rather than saying we weren't motivated, we really didn't show up, we didn't really want to be in this game, we thought that we were going to win the SEC and go to the playoff. All right. Noah Iverson, 9-1 the last 2 years in bowl games. Yes. Howard Smooth. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. He isn't worth a hot cup of coffee. Throw his ass in the trash. I believe he's talking about Mark Richt. That would be my guess. Howard, welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please chill. Everybody you know, we're here. We're talking college football. Poet247. This, besides Noah's comments early in the chat, it does my heart good to see new contributors to the live chat. I have yet to see any of these people. Poet247, welcome to Mark Rogers TV. We are the voice of college football. Yet they want to rank 9 SEC teams in the top 15 when they can get away with it. I mean, Kentucky was up to 10th at one point. Kentucky, Florida, Mississippi State couldn't possibly be overrated. All right, I'm trying to follow your logic here, Poet247. Yes, the SEC might be slightly overrated, and that's one of the reasons why I don't use the national rankings. But those are pretty good football teams, and I believe Kentucky's fairly ranked. I know they're not impressive with the way they play, especially on offense, but they do have a legitimately top 10 defense in the country. Kentucky does. They are that good on defense. And they really did not play a non-conference game where they had a chance to prove that because, of course, they played Louisville in the non-conference, and Louisville was beyond atrocious. But Kentucky beat South Carolina. They held them to 10 points. They held Mississippi State to 7. They held Vandy to 7. And I know it's just Vandy, but it's a Kyle Shermer-led Vandy team that scored a lot of points this season. Kentucky was good. They took Texas A&M to overtime on the road. They beat Florida by 2 scores. They beat Missouri on the road. Thomas Towns, welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. It's great to have you. Noah claims that the Big Ten Western Division is 5 teams that would win the ACC Coastal. Well, this is all conjecture, but this is what we do. We talk college football, and we talk about things that don't necessarily pertain to reality. We can't move Minnesota to the ACC Coastal to play next year and see what would happen. That would be fun. We should displace one team in every division every year and send them to another division to see how well they would do and have the fans vote. So, for example, take a team from the SEC Western Division that is a bit stuck in that mid-tier range and has been. Texas A&M. Send them somewhere else. Could they win the Pac-12 South? Could they win the ACC Coastal? Could they win the Big Ten Western Division? Dennis, I know it's a rough go for you. What can I say? Wow. 7-6. 7-6 against not a difficult schedule. LSU in the non-conference, very formidable game, but the other 3 non-conference games, very winnable, and they did win them. Toledo's decent. And then there was no Clemson on the ACC schedule. There was no North Carolina State. There was no Syracuse. They had a pretty light touch in the ACC. They play in the worst division of the 2. And they played, of course, Florida State, who is way down. And their other non-division game was against Boston College. Of course, they lost that one at Chestnut Hill by a couple scores. And then they played this Wisconsin team that went 5-4 in the Big Ten. Was not a great vintage Wisconsin team. This is not a better one of the better Wisconsin teams. So, Dennis, I don't know what to think about your program. I don't want to overstate this, but if we take circumstances into account and if we take expectations into account, so the current coaching staff, head coach, personnel on the roster that's coming back next season, the recruiting class that's coming in, which is very unfavorable for a Miami standard, and then also against the expectation that this school is going to compete for division championships. They should own the division. This might be, and again, I'm basing this against the expectation, might be the worst Power 5 situation in the country. I need a haircut. It might be the worst Power 5 situation in the country. If you guys are following my logic. Yes, Miami is better than North Carolina, but the expectations aren't there at North Carolina. Against the expectation, and based on what the head coach has shown us over the past year plus, Mark Richt just does not appear to be in control of this program and seems to have lost. I want to fall short of saying he's lost his mind. I have a great deal of respect for Mark Richt. And when they hired Mark Richt, I thought that was a good move. I didn't think that that was an over-the-top slam dunk, wow, we just won our national championship move, like when Urban Meyer was hired at Ohio State. That day I thought, and I told everybody I could get a hold of, Ohio State just won a national championship because they hired Urban Meyer. So I didn't respond to it like that, but I thought it was a good hire. And I respected what Mark Richt accomplished at Georgia. Even though he did not win a national championship, he won, I believe, 3 SEC championships. He consistently won 10 or 11 games. His low water mark was going 9-3 at Georgia. He did have an 8-4 team. But if you run through his performance at Georgia, and I know it now pales in comparison to what Kirby Smart is doing at Georgia, but consider before Mark Richt arrived at Georgia, look at Georgia football from the time that Vince Dooley concluded his run in the late 80s through the time that Mark Richt took over in, I believe, 2002. Georgia was good. They had some good teams, but they were kind of like a LSU during that time as well. They were, I would liken Georgia's run from the late 80s into the early 2000s to, they weren't Michigan State. They weren't that good. They were North Carolina State. They were North Carolina State. Georgia football from the late 80s into the 2000s, they were North Carolina State. They were going 8-4 most of the time. And then Mark Richt took over, and they suddenly were going to big bowl games, winning a lot of games, consistently contending for the SEC championship, not accomplishing a lot of championship runs, not completing them. But I respected what Mark Richt accomplished at Georgia. Now, again, it's not as impressive now that we've seen what Kirby Smart can do with Georgia-type recruits. As of 1 hour ago, Saturday Down South is running an article, "Is Mark Richt officially in the hot seat following a bowl loss? Social media weighs in." Okay, well, we don't know that. We can put him on the hot seat, our hot seat, as public opinion, but we don't count. All right, so I always love those clickbait articles. All right, Mark Richt at Georgia. And for those of you who've been watching me for a long time, know that I hold myself accountable to almost know this stuff off the top of my head, but I'm not going to try to squeeze my brain right now to go through Mark Richt's records at Georgia. So let's read them. This is what he did. And here's his record each season and the ranking at Georgia. Starting in 2001, 8-4, number 22 in the country, 13-1, number 3 in the country, 11-3, number 7 in the country, 10-2, number 6 in the country, 10-3, number 10 in the country, 9-4, number 23, 11-2, number 2, 10-3, number 10, 8-6 unranked, 6-7. Remember that team? Yeah, they lost the Liberty Bowl. Unranked, 10-4, number 18, 12-2, number 4. Of course, the famous team that lost to Bama in the SEC championship game, in which they made it all the way down to the 4-yard line when the clock ran out. Okay, in 2013, then 8-6 unranked, 10-3, number 9, and 9-3, number 25. And the reason that says number 25 at 9-3, which doesn't add up, is that Mark Richt left. He did not coach the bowl game. They lost the bowl game and finished at 25 in the country. So, in 15 seasons at Georgia, he finished ranked 12 times. 12 out of 15 seasons, he finished ranked in the top 25. 8 times out of 15 years, he finished ranked in the top 10. And he won the SEC championship twice. 2002, 2005. They lost the championship game in 11 and 12. Has anyone tried the call-in number? Possibly does not work. Let's see, 860-325-3687. I will ask all of you who do not subscribe to our newsletter. I did not release one this past week because of the holiday. I should have announced that, but I'm going to ask you to subscribe to our newsletter. It's free. It's free, and you get college football information, and you get to keep up with the channel and all the happenings with me. Not whether I'm doing my laundry today, but professionally. It's the voice of college football. Please send your email address to mine. Send your email address, whatever that is, to MarkRogersTV@gmail.com, and I will put you on the list, and our newsletter will be sent to you each and every Monday, and that's going to be very critical going forward, that you're on our newsletter list. You have subscribed to our newsletter. It's very important. Believe me, it's important. All right. All right, what do we have here? I can only go so far back on the chat, so I apologize if you had a comment for me early in the chat and then wanted me to comment or respond to your question or comment, because I can only go so far back. So the first comment that I'm seeing here is from Albert Campos. Albert, welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I hope that you've subscribed. If you haven't, don't jump the gun. Check out the videos. We do up college football like nobody else. We need a new coach. Matt Campbell is a good coach. He probably would come to Miami if offered. You would think so. You would think so, wouldn't you? Matt Campbell at Miami. That would be a good hire. Renegade 850. Welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Thank you so much. And I think I'm going to guess that many of you have subscribed this week. I have gained more subscribers in the past week to 10 days than I have probably in the history of the channel. I typically gain about 300 to 350 subscribers per month, and I've gained about that many in the last week or so. So thank you. Poa247, Wisconsin is a master at boring teams to death. I love watching Wisconsin play football. Love it. Wisconsin's almost physical to the point that for those of you like myself who are annoyed at watching both the NFL and college football with all the rules that have been implemented to protect the players, and I'm all for protecting the players. I do not like to see guys hurt and certainly seriously or permanently injured. Neck, spine, head, concussion, all those things, especially. So I am fully in support of the rules that have been enacted to protect the players, but it has taken away from the game. I watch football, and especially at the NFL level, and I wonder, how can these guys play defensive football? How can they do it? I saw Jadeveon Clowney on Sunday in a key drive that eventually led to the Eagles kicking the game-winning field goal. He came through the pocket, and he barely dropped his head about that much. And Jadeveon Clowney is a tall dude, and he barely did that, and he hit the quarterback cleanly right after he released the ball, Nick Foles. And I thought it was a clean hit, but by rule, he dropped the crown of the helmet barely, and he got slammed with a 15-yard penalty. Now, the reason why it's so unfair is that if Jadeveon Clowney would have hit Nick Foles straight up, he would have slammed his headgear right into Nick Foles' headgear, and he would have gotten called for that. The reason I'm saying all that is that Wisconsin is able to kind of circumvent the extraction of the physical element of football that we're experiencing based on all these crazy rules that limit the defenders from laying wood on the offensive players. And Wisconsin replaces that with just brute force. Offensive lines just beating down, fullbacks just beating down the defense. They do it in a wrestler's sort of mentality with a wrestler's approach. It's beautiful. Wisconsin is not boring. Now, see, and Poet, obviously, you have your right to say whatever you want and have your own opinion. This is my opinion. If every team in America did what Wisconsin does, then it would be boring. Then it would be boring. Then we might as well turn on ESPN Classic and watch a bunch of games from 1970. Have you ever done that? Flip on a bunch of games from 1970. You can look them up on YouTube, and God bless those people. Back then, that's what they had. That's what they loved. The earliest games that I watched back in the late 70s with a wishbone and with other teams running out of the power I. And when I say power I formation, most people think of two backs. No, I'm talking about three backs in the backfield because you only had one wide receiver. We loved it. That's all we knew. So, no, I would not want to revert to that and have every team play like that. Wisconsin threw 11 passes tonight. No, I don't want that's the beauty of it. They're unique. This is what has become boring in college football, is that everybody's throwing the ball 52 times a game and spreading the field with five wide and running that stupid RPO over and over, where the quarterback takes the ball, puts it in the gut of the running back, and he checks out the defensive end, and then everybody runs the same offense. It all looks the same. That is what's becoming boring. When that was implemented by a few people 10 to 12 years ago, it was exciting because it was new. It was different. It's like, what are they doing? They're running like a wing T, but it's foundational to a passing attack instead of what it was back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s when it was a rushing offense. It was basically taking the concept that why not use the quarterback as a running back and have an extra blocker? That was just one of the concepts. Why not make the defensive end commit himself? Therefore, the quarterback can make a decision on who should carry the football. And there are a lot of other nuances to it. But that was exciting 10 years ago because there were only a few teams doing it and doing it well. Now everybody does it. Everybody runs the same offense. It's boring. So you know what happens when I get to see Wisconsin play? And wow. And certainly let's put in another category what we saw last night with Georgia Tech that is now going to be extinct in the Power Five because, of course, Jeff Collins is not going to run a triple option attack. Air Force, Navy, Army, those schools. Put them to the side. Everybody's doing the same thing. Obviously, everybody has different plays and different concepts and different run-pass ratios. Notre Dame's a little bit more run-heavy. LSU is always going to be run-heavy. And fortunately, we do still see Michigan in particular. They're probably the strongest tight end team in the country out of the big power teams, the big elite teams. But, man, everybody just looks the same. You know, I hear from time to time people say, because it's stereotypical, that the Big Ten, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. No, the Big Ten's not 3 yards in a cloud of dust outside of Wisconsin. The Big Ten's throwing just as many passes as any other league in America outside the Big 12. So I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's a beautiful thing because it's different. Matchups make games, just like boxing matchups. You wouldn't want to see the same boxer a zillion times matched up against each other. Dennis Wilson, I bet Al Golden and Randy Shannon sitting back laughing at this program. Mr. Mark is the truth. So eyes open. Eyes open. This is a new handle for me to see. This, I believe, is the first time you've ever commented in a live chat or to a video. So welcome to Mark Rogers TV. And then I sometimes find out for these people that are commenting for the first time that you've been watching for a long time. You just didn't feel like commenting. And that's fine. You don't need to comment. I wish you would, but you don't need to comment if you just want to take it in. But welcome. J.A. Astafan, if the BOT does not fire Mark Richt after these pathetic seasons, they are complicit in killing the team. Okay. I said the same thing when Mark Richt was fired at Georgia, or there was a mutual decision made, and when Les Miles was fired at LSU. So you have a job, I have a job. We are paid a certain amount of money against the industry standard. We should have an expectation of our performance communicated to us based on how much money we make and what the expectations are and what they're stated. Well, if Jim Harbaugh was at Maryland or Rutgers, the expectation would be completely different than being the head coach at the University of Michigan. That's why he's facing so much scrutiny. He's being paid Urban Meyer, Nick Saban money. Therefore, he needs to perform like Nick Saban and Urban Meyer and contend for national championships. Likewise, was Les Miles a good football coach? Did he produce good teams at LSU? Yes, he did. They were good. So on one hand, we could say, my goodness, what does he have to do? 9-3 is not good enough. You know what? Not based on what he's being paid. It's not good enough. Les Miles was being paid to win and contend for SEC championships and by extension, national championships. So was Mark Richt. He was a top 5 to 10 paid coach. He was not producing at that level, or had not been the couple seasons prior to his dismissal. Although Mark Richt really did not underachieve for long, like one season at Georgia. Les Miles, following the 2011 championship run to the BCS, from 2012 on through when he got fired, which I believe was a few games into 2016. I think they lost at Auburn to go to 3-2. He had 4 or 5 seasons in which he was going 8-5, 9-4 over and over and over. And Les Miles was being paid to win SEC championships, contend for the national playoff. And he was not able to do that. So the amount of the compensation determines what the expectations are. So I relate this to the Mark Richt situation, assuming I don't know off the top of my head his compensation. I assume he's being compensated like a top 10 coach in the nation. Therefore, we're looking at season number 1. He comes in, they go 9-4, they win a bowl game, they finish on a strong note, a good note, they have a good recruiting class, all is well. He gets off to the 10-0 start, and despite some warning signs offensively, especially, and of course at the quarterback position, all was well at 10-0 despite some narrow misses, some narrow wins. They, of course, collapsed. The Wisconsin game wasn't awful in the Orange Bowl last year. The Clemson performance, I think, was very concerning, and in that they did not compete. Clemson had one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the country. I did not expect them to take Clemson to the wire or certainly not win the game, but they should have shown up. They should have been prepared. That should have been a 27-17 kind of game. And I believe most Miami fans would have been okay with that kind of effort, but they did not show up. They got obliterated. That was the game that concerned me. You would think that the other 2 games would concern me because Clemson's the best team that they lost to last year. But it was actually the Clemson game, because the Pitt game, you're going to have a slip up once in a while, and they really weren't that good to be 10-0. So that game could have come in game 5 or 6 against North Carolina or Duke, and they could have beaten Pitt and been 10-1 and won the division, if you follow my logic. And then it wouldn't have stuck out like a sore thumb, like you were 10-0, you're playing for the playoff, you go to Pitt against a bad team and you lose. Instead, it would have been, oh, you slipped up way back in October, you recovered, everybody's going to lose a game, almost everybody in the country, you're 10-1, you're going to the ACC championship game. So I didn't have as much trouble with the Pitt game. It was more the Clemson game, playing for a championship and not competing and not being prepared from a scheme standpoint to take on Clemson. And then this season, right out of the gate. So during the off season, and I'm talking way too much Miami football probably, but I'll make this one final point as we see Baylor and Vandy hitting the field. That the issue I had with Mark Richt's decision to start Malik Rocher is, number one, he's not a good quarterback, so he should not be starting. But it was just the process. So Malik Rocher had that awful closing run against Pitt, Clemson, and Wisconsin. He threw 4 touchdowns and 7 picks. He completed 41% of his passes down the stretch. So had he competed for the job and the job been wide open in spring camp and then in the summer, and then let's say on August 15th with 2 weeks left until the season opener against LSU, Mark Richt would have said, Malik Rocher has improved considerably. He looks great. He's learned a lot. He's the best quarterback we've got right now, and started him. I would have said, well, I've got my doubts, but he's a professional coach. He knows what he's doing. He's evaluated Malik Rocher, and he certainly could have taken great strides during this time. We haven't seen him play. Except for the spring game, we haven't seen him play, so maybe he's ready to go. But that's not what happened. What happened was they barely got into the spring workouts, and Mark Richt has 2 highly touted quarterbacks in Jaron Williams and N'Kosi Perry, and obviously Perry had been on campus for a year, and he announces that Malik Rocher is the starting quarterback. And I'm thinking, wait, this guy has not had any time, any practice time or scrimmages against that defense to prove that he's improved. And the last time he left the field, he was awful. So what has happened that he has been renamed the starting quarterback? He should not be the starting quarterback. He should have to earn it. So I called into question Mark Richt's approach to the decision. And then once he got into the season, it became a circus because he, of course, named him the starter. He was lousy. He stayed with him. Of course, once they blew the game against LSU, they had very winnable games. They won them despite Rocher not playing well. Then N'Kosi Perry took over, and Perry played okay. He played fairly well, and it was understandable as a true, I believe, a redshirt freshman, right? Versus a senior. And then, Perry plays. They have the big comeback win against a Florida State team that's bad, but it's a rivalry game against a talented opponent. And it looked like Perry was going to have one of those seasons where you would have to live with it. Like, he's going to show flashes. And as long as he doesn't turn over the ball, shoot, we can live with 50% throwing. But then they get to that Virginia game. Perry plays awful in the first half. And I understand under normal circumstances, Richt pulling Perry down like 10-0 near halftime of that Virginia game, if he had confidence in his backup quarterback. So most senior quarterbacks who are not starting in college football are not starting because they're limited athletically. They're not your high ceiling guy. That's why they're still sitting on the bench as seniors. But probably if you're at an elite program, they're dependable. They're reliable. They're going to make the right read. They're going to make the right decision. And you don't have to worry about their decision-making process, and you don't have to worry about their poise. That's not the case with Rocher. He's proven this. Look at the awful decision-making tonight. It was incredible how bad it was that he just doesn't see the field and makes awful decisions. Anyway, then you bring that guy in, and he maybe can bleed 2 touchdowns out of the offense, and you win the game, and you get out of there, and then you reestablish N'Kosi Perry at some point as the starter. But the problem is that Mark Richt didn't have a safety net for himself. He pulls Perry against Virginia, and then Rocher plays just as bad, and they lose. And so then it's like, well, who do you play now? And so he wrestled back and forth, and then he finally gave Perry the job, and he finishes the season at 7-5. They win their final 2 games, or was it 3 games? I think they were 4-5. They win their final 3 games to get to bowl play, and not a great season, but they beat some decent teams late in the season. Who did they beat? Pitt, of course, in the final game. North Carolina, of course. Everybody beats North Carolina. Kind of losing it here in terms of who else did they beat late in the season to get to bowl play. Virginia Tech, yeah. Like 34-13, they killed Virginia Tech. So anyway, apparently N'Kosi Perry fired off a bunch of dumb tweets, and this was his punishment. Wow. It's a bad situation. So anyway, Rocher's off to whatever he's going to do the rest of his life. It's certainly not playing in the NFL. And Mark Richt is going to have to live with this decision or a handling of a situation that was difficult. And I'm not saying it's easy to handle that situation. It's not. But he gets paid major money to be able to do so. All right. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Mark, I called to help you out, and I'm listening to the show. Happy holidays, DeAndre.
Thank you so much, DeAndre. How are you?
Good. Happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays to you.
Clemson.
Yep.
Let's talk about Clemson and Notre Dame. It's going to be a great game. What's the stuff that Dexter Lawrence had in the system?
You know, I've only heard about that on the TV and watching the games. I have not read any articles on it. And I heard him respond that he doesn't know what happened. He claims innocence. So does Dabo Swinney. Well, Dabo Swinney obviously doesn't know everything that he takes, but he is sticking up for the kid's character. I don't know. You know, we can look into it, but I don't know. I haven't read anything on it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a great game. I mean, Clemson's so deep around down the defensive line. The guy Higgins that bets Dexter Lawrence, they already said that he's an NFL pick. Even if he didn't get that much playing time this year, he's pretty good from what I've seen and remember of. Is it Huggins or Higgins? I think it's Huggins. But everybody said that he's pretty good. So I think they still going to be. When Dexter Lawrence is a monster, I mean, he's a first-round pick. So, I know it's harder to play somebody like that. But I think they'll be all right along that defensive line. And, I know they might get a little bit more run on them than what they usually would, but I think they'll be all right. But bowl season hasn't really been that exciting for me this year. There's not one that had caught my attention outside. I think the Bahama Bowl, I watched it. And for some reason, I love watching the Mexico Bowl.
What's that?
I don't know why, Mark. The Mexico Bowl. That bowl I always watch every year. I don't know why.
Okay.
That's one of my favorite bowls right there.
Oh, I can't even remember who played in it right offhand. That was the first week. Who played in the New Mexico Bowl? Oh, my goodness. I'm blanking out.
Is it Utah State?
Utah State, and they killed somebody 52-13. I can remember the score. I can't remember who they played.
Texas.
Yes.
North Texas.
Yes. I watched the game.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
you like that one.
My favorite bowls. Yeah, because there's always high scoring. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but there's always some two weird teams. I think New Mexico played in one year, and like the score was like 45, 35 or something.
They played Arizona.
Right. They always get two good teams. And the Bahama Bowl is always good too. I mean, it don't look like nobody be in the crowd, but it always look like it's always a good bowl. But but I can't wait for this weekend. I can't wait to see what Tua's going to do. See if he's healthy against Oklahoma. I can't wait to see what Oklahoma's do, because I don't think this is one of Alabama's best teams as far as defensive wise. So I want to see what Oklahoma's going to do against Alabama. But you get Nick Saban 4 weeks to prepare for somebody, they're going to give him a hard time. So he's going to find every weakness in somebody. So I think that Oklahoma's going to be in. He's going to be real high scoring. Oklahoma's going to lose, or Oklahoma's going to get blown up. That's the way I look at it. But I think Alabama's going to come away with a win there. So,
Yeah, like I've said a number of times, I think it's fairly simple analysis to say that Alabama has nearly as good an offense as Oklahoma, if not better. In terms of NFL players, Alabama actually has a better offense than Oklahoma. In terms of the productivity on the field right now, I'm going to separate them by saying Kyler Murray's an X factor in the running game that Alabama doesn't have with Tua, or even with Hurts. Hurts is an extremely good runner, but Kyler Murray's like a Michael Vick kind of runner. And so Oklahoma is slightly better on offense because of that. The offensive line is really good. It's almost like an SEC offensive line, or it is.
Right.
But without if Hollywood's healthy for Oklahoma, that changes things.
Right.
I do think, Marquise Brown.
Yeah. I'm ready for it. I think it's going to be an interesting weekend, and I can't wait to see it. If it's going to be Clemson, Alabama 3 or 4, whatever, depends on who you ask. Or is it going to be somebody new? But I think Clemson's going to be all right. People always say, well, Clemson played a weak schedule. And you know more about this than I do. I think Clemson played 7 bowl teams. I think Notre Dame played 3.
Notre Dame played 3 bowl teams?
I think you know about it more than I do.
Pitt, Stanford, Michigan, Virginia Tech. There's 4.
Vandy. Was that Vandy?
Vandy. I did not say Vandy. There's 5.
Okay.
Wake Forest, there's 6. Syracuse, there's 7.
7. Okay. I was wrong. I thought I heard that they only played.
Yeah. Don't believe everything you hear, DeAndre.
Yeah. Thought they only played 4. Yeah, I could have been wrong. Yeah, but I was like, wow, like they only play. I didn't look at their schedule. All I know, they struggle with Ball and Vandy and a couple other teams. I mean, I think Notre Dame's a pretty good team, and we're going to see how it goes. And, hopefully Clemson come away with a win. Being a 14-point favorite, I think it's kind of high.
I think so, too.
Close.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be razor close, like you're going to be sweating with 13 seconds left in the game. But I think it's going to be, a 1-2 score game, and you're going to always kind of have the lead on them with maybe a score in hand. So it's going to be, you're going to be up maybe 10-3, and then it's going to be 10-6. Then you're going to be up 17-6, then 17-13. Like I just see you getting in front and like staying not comfortably in front, but where you've got a possession or a score or 2 ahead of them, and maybe it finishes something in the 30-21 range or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to see. Like I said, I think Notre Dame, I didn't see a lot of their games. Maybe when they played the ACC school, I didn't see a lot of their games. But, I know one of the knocks. I know they can say you can't believe everything you hear, but You know, there was something going around. I don't know what it was about Notre Dame football not playing that much of a harder or just as hard a schedule as Clemson, or Clemson having a harder schedule. I didn't know people didn't look at their schedules like USC and Florida State, which are big name schools, but they didn't have the year. Neither one of them went to a bowl and had the year that everybody else thought they should have. Northwestern, we didn't name them either. So yeah, they probably both played 7 bowl teams. So, but
yeah, I think we're up to 8 now. We should have named the teams that didn't go to a bowl game. I think that would be Ball State, Navy, and Florida State. Maybe somebody else. USC. There you go. So it was 8-4. Yeah, it was 8 bowl teams.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think there's any question, DeAndre. I was just going to say, I don't think there's any question that if we would have looked at the 2 schedules, which of course I did because I rank all the schedules preseason, that the Notre Dame schedule at that point was much more difficult, appeared to be much more difficult than Clemson's, but Florida State was worse than we thought. USC was worse than we thought. Virginia Tech, Stanford, all those teams underachieved. So like you said, it's a big name schedule. Notre Dame's schedule's tough, but most of those teams had down years. So it turned out to be a schedule that wasn't that brutal. It was an okay schedule.
But, you know, as soon as they get on the field, we're going to settle it. And I just can't wait. I mean, we all been talking about it, you know, about Clemson secondary. And, you know, I'd be listening to some of the podcasts talk about it. And then they were saying that Ian Book is a much better passer outside of the pocket than he is inside the pocket.
Yep.
So, I'd like to ask you 2 more questions, Mark. I'll let you go.
Sure.
What was the difference between Trevor Lawrence coming out of college, high school, and Fields? I mean, I know it depends on what publication you read. There were 1A and 1B. What was the big difference between the 2?
Well, there was no big difference. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, and we were looking at it. And actually, I just released a video on SD1 Sports talking about the Justin Fields situation, but where, depending on your publication, you nailed it. One of them had Fields 1, Lawrence 2. The other one flip-flopped them. They were neck and neck in the running for best quarterback out of high school. And at least with Trevor Lawrence, we can now see why. He's the deal. Justin Fields, we don't know. We don't know yet.
See that with quarterback, I think I told you this before, because I said I look back at Florida State when guys would get red-shirted, and then they'll wait 2 or 3 years and come in, and the next guy will come in 2 or 3 years and wait, and you know, they'll be the, get in on garbage time when Florida State was blowing out people. But I couldn't understand, why would you go somewhere where you already got an established quarterback 5? You know, people were talking about these guys, they throw more and they, all these passing camps, and they go to all these camps. Go to a school where you have a chance to start at. You know, like Fields. I mean, yeah, I know you might love Georgia in your heart, but go to Florida. You know, Franz took down to a national championship game. I said, well, he wants to compete. Fields might be good. I don't know, because I didn't really see him play this much this year. But Franz just took him to a national championship game. I don't think he's going to push that guy out. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I see some of the guys, like Jameer White. He was the #1 running back coming out of high school last year. He's from my area.
Yep.
I seen him play, and I couldn't understand. Georgia has Swift, Vander Holyfield. I'm like, why go to Georgia and you can go to North Carolina and get on the field fast, or state? You be on the field. I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand that you're trying to compete, but for a starting job. But your main goal is a business and to showcase your skills at that level. And I just don't understand why so many guys, like offensive linemen, I understand. They could put 7 offensive linemen out there, run an elephant packet like Stanford used to do when they were getting all them offensive linemen, and have the running backs like McCaffrey and them just run through the hole. But I can't understand why some of these guys are just ganging up at one school. Even Clemson with wide receivers is lovely, but how many balls do you got to go around for you to put a showcase on? And you got other schools to go to. And that's what I think did Florida, Miami, or Florida State in at some point, that all these guys are going to one school. Like, why go to Florida, Florida State, and Miami when I can go play at some of these other schools? And I don't get it. I mean, I'm sure I've never been to Athens, Georgia. I'm sure it's a lovely place, but I'm sure you can find another place to play. And I think with Georgia Tech finally getting a coach that's not going to run the triple option, I don't know what he's going to run there. I think that's going to break up some of that talent that Georgia, Clemson, and Florida is going to get, that has been getting over the years. That Georgia Tech is a nice campus, and I know they don't have the money that Clemson and Georgia has, but there's no reason why they all these people should be ganging up at one school. You know, you like to see teams dominate, but when they dominate to the point that you can't, you know, that you always see the same teams, I mean, like, dang, come on, let's look at something else here. Like, I mean, there's no reason why Georgia Tech should be. I'm not gonna say bad because they've been decent and going to bowl games, and I think they have won an ACC championship in the last 10 years under Paul Johnson. But there's no reason. My last question. I was looking at Georgia's schedule, and I go back to this Georgia and some of the other SEC schools, and everybody says, well, the SEC got to play each other. That's why they play such a week 9 conference schedule. I don't think Georgia's schedule was that hard. I know they had to go to LSU, and LSU's a different place playing down in Death Valley when they play. But I mean, Georgia's schedule was kind of weak if you look at it. I mean, not saying that South Carolina, Florida, and Kentucky were bad teams, but I didn't look at their schedule. I mean, they played Austin Peay and 2 other really bad teams, and they played Georgia Tech at the end of the year. And I was kind of shocked how bad and how difficult the schedule was this past year.
So, DeAndre,
somebody backed out on them.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Well, I was just going to say that, as you know, I rank all the schedules during the off season. And off the top of my head, I believe I ranked Georgia as having the easiest schedule in the SEC. And I think it was around number 42 in the nation out of the 68 Power 5 teams. That's where I ranked them because, like you said, they're obviously the best team in their division. So they don't have to play the best team. They're playing all the other teams. On top of that, yeah, they had the trip to LSU. They always play Auburn, which I think all of us expected Auburn to be a good team, better than they turned out to be, like a top 15 team. But this was the year that they didn't play anybody non-conference. So Georgia over the last several years has either played a Clemson or a Notre Dame or a North Carolina when they were good a few years ago, non-conference, in addition to playing Georgia Tech. They did not have a game like that. So they played 3 awful opponents, as you mentioned, Austin Peay and a few other teams like that. In addition to playing Georgia Tech, who Georgia Tech's a top 50 team in the country. They're not that good either. So, yeah, the schedule was not daunting for Georgia. They didn't really show us anything for the first 5 or 6, really until they played Florida, was the first good team that they played, and that was 6-7 weeks into the season.
Right. Yeah. Well, Mark, man, this is always great talking to you. I know you'll take a phone call, but let's call and talk to Mark. Now, you talk about Miami, and, you know, and I was telling Lonzo this, and you know, everybody's going to take up for their team. But from what I read and from what I've seen, our Miami program doesn't have that much money. I mean, I'm not going to say they're as bad as Wake Forest or Boston College as far as money, but I read some of them publications because I keep up with the local schools and Clemson, of course, and somewhat Boston College because my friend is the athletic director at Boston College. But, you know, I just feel Miami doesn't have that good of a facilities and stuff.
No, they don't.
I know his comeback was, his comeback was like, well, you know, they played in a professional stadium, but that's a professional stadium. That's not Miami Stadium. It's not Clemson or whatever. I mean, a lot of kids are coming from Miami. That Dave area, and they all going to Clemson or Alabama. I mean, I think one of Clemson's one of the starting quarterbacks for Alabama, and I don't know where the other kid went. They had the 2 top DBs in the country, right there in Miami, and they both went somewhere else and not Miami. I'm like, dang. You know, I know Clemson got a few guys that are on out of that particular, this would be a hotbed for Miami area that went to Clemson instead of going to Miami. And I'm like, why are there all these people going everywhere else but Miami? And I know everybody said MarkRogersTV is a bad coach or play calling or something like that. And I agree with what you said. All the offenses are similar. I remember when Sean King came out of Tulane and then Bowden went to Clemson from Tulane. And, you know, that's the first team that I seen doing was Tulane, running the type of offense that we're seeing now. I think Rodriguez was the coordinator at that time. But now, like you said, everybody's running this offense. Chad Morris at Arkansas, Alabama. Somebody's running something similar to what we see now. And the question is, who had a better talent to out-talent the team across from me? I mean, nobody's really different now. I'm not a big fan of Wisconsin football or nothing like that. But, you know, for some reason, I was watching a bowl today about for 2009, I think Miami and Wisconsin played. And Wisconsin beat Miami then. For some reason, Wisconsin has Miami's number. I don't know why, but for some reason, they always beat Miami. But we'll see how these offenses turn out. What can people come up with? Well, I don't know what much more you can do, but we didn't see this coming with Tulane and Sean King a couple of years ago. I mean, like you said, 10, maybe longer than about, 15 years ago when Sean King was at Tulane, and they were undefeated. Nobody saw that offense coming with Tommy Bowden and Rodriguez. Now everybody does it. So we're going to see how it turns out. Nobody seen Miami and BYU throwing the ball around like that in the 80s. And I think Florida State might have threw it a little bit like they did. But nobody saw that. And then the funny good was Steve Spurrier. It's going to be interesting to see what people can come up with to make, the selling point to these kids and see what happens. What happens with them. Because Clemson and Alabama and Oklahoma, Texas, and Florida, they recruiting at a heavy rate. And Florida State, I guess, browsed to that position as offensive coordinator, and they're going to get back in the mix. They better change their offenses and get some of these players in because Clemson, Alabama, and Oklahoma, I think they're going to be there for a while. I don't know what's going on with Ohio State, but those three schools ain't going nowhere with the recruitment looks. I can't wait to see Oregon either. And Oregon, the quarterback coming back. So it's going to be interesting.
Yes, he is. And they were very close to winning that division this year.
Right.
So I'm going to have to study up on their defensive personnel because they have some really big playmakers on defense, Jalen Jelks, Troy Dye, and those guys are probably going to move on. But they had a decent defense this year. They should have been able to win that division this year with Washington slipping up, but they just they blew a couple games that they shouldn't have. The two guys that you're talking about that came out of American Heritage High School are Patrick Surtain and Tyson Campbell, who went to Alabama and Georgia, the two cornerbacks that got away from Miami, that had Miami in their final few, and then they took off for the SEC. Yep.
Mark, man, you have a great New Year's, man. It's always great talking to you. I hope you and the kids had a great Christmas, and I'll keep listening to the show, man. I just got tired of hearing about Miami.
Thanks, DeAndre. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I hear you. Have a good one.
You too, bye.
Our man DeAndre, who's all pumped up as his Clemson Tigers take on Notre Dame in the national semifinal at the Cotton Bowl. And I was going to tell DeAndre there's a reason that Wisconsin has had Miami's number. They're better. They've just been better. This team's better than this year's Miami team, and last year's Wisconsin team was better than Miami. Not considerably. And if they played over and over and over, if they played a series, yes, Wisconsin would not beat Miami 35-3. So that's a double-edged sword. That was the only game that was played. Therefore, Wisconsin fans or Miami detractors can say 35-3. And that's the result of the game. It was a blowout. The teams weren't even close tonight. But to be realistic, 7-5, 7-5. Yes, Wisconsin played a more difficult schedule. Yes, I felt them to be the better team. I thought Vegas lost its mind, making Miami a 4-point favorite. That's why I made some money taking Wisconsin against the spread and against the money line. But if they played 10 times, Miami wouldn't just beat them into the ground by 30 points every time. But I believe, or Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a better team this year, and last year's Wisconsin team was better than Miami. I don't think it has much to do with them having their number. They're just better. Wisconsin has been a better football program than Miami for the past 15 years. Ever since, 2003, 2004, in that range, after Miami came off those championship teams, and they were still really good for about 2 more years, ever since about 03, 04, Wisconsin, except for a couple down years at 8-5, 7-6, they have been one of the top 15 programs in the country for a substantial period of time now, for 15 years. And Miami hasn't. And I know that Miami fans who have orange and green colored glasses would like to think, and they're probably right to some extent, that they have a more talented team, a more talented roster. Their players, if they all lined up the Wisconsin players on a sideline and the Miami players and they ran a 40-yard dash, that most of the Miami guys would finish ahead of the Wisconsin guys, maybe. But after a while, you got to stop saying, we're more talented, but somehow they beat us. No, Wisconsin's just better. Wisconsin's been better than Miami for 15 years. Almost every year, they have been better. Go year by year by year and see Wisconsin, Miami. And Wisconsin's typically played in the better conference and still been better with a better record and beaten better teams. All right, I'm going to check out the rest of the live chat unless somebody else wants to call at 860-325-3687. That's 860-325-3687. Otherwise, I'm going to check out this Baylor Vandy game and see what we've got here. I took Vandy to win, but I took Baylor plus the 4.5 points. We'll see how we do. Man, can I keep this up? 12-1 in my bowl picks, 10-3 against the spread. All right. I'm never going to be able to pronounce your name, but I appreciate you jumping on board here. Amadou X Pro. I feel they should drop some of these bowls and teams that weren't in the top 3, at least in their division. But who is they? So I get that you don't want to see marginal teams playing in bowl games. I get that you don't want to see 6-6 Vandy and 6-6 Baylor, but I don't have an issue with this. But I understand the point that other people do. They don't want to see marginal teams playing in bowl games. But as long as there's a sponsorship, and as long as people will watch on TV and go to the games, more so watch on TV. Not a whole lot of people will travel to go to these games, but people watch on TV. This will outdraw any college basketball game this weekend by far. It won't even be close. So people love watching bowl games. They love watching football. So as long as there's a sponsorship and they can make money and bring the teams to the site, then I don't know who they is that's going to outlaw these kind of games. You should just not watch those games. Make your bowl season everybody 8-4 and better or something. Dennis, Mark Rogers, no, Wisconsin hasn't been better than Miami for 15 years. Yes, they have, Dennis. Dennis, oh my goodness. I'm not saying every single week of the last 15 years, but I'm saying over the last 15 years, there is no comparison between Wisconsin and Miami. No comparison. Dennis, I don't want to school you in front of 44 people and the other 1,000 that will watch eventually. Dennis, please don't make me do this to you. There's no comparison between Wisconsin and Miami the last 15 years. Wisconsin has been regularly ranked and usually ranked in the top 10 or 15 in the country. Year after year after year. They have participated in BCS games, Rose Bowls. Believe me, it's all right here. Miami has not. Miami has not participated in a major bowl game other than making it to the Orange Bowl, a season in which they lost their final 3 games and finished outside the top 15 in the nation after they were embarrassed the final 3 games of the season. They had not been to a major bowl game since playing Florida State in the 2004 Orange Bowl. They lost 10 bowl games in a row. Wisconsin's been winning bowl games over the likes of Auburn and USC. Yes, there's no comparison between Wisconsin and Miami over the last 15 years. Dennis, do yourself a favor. I don't want to have to do this to you. You look it up yourself. Compare Wisconsin's record and Miami's records and their national rankings over the last 15 years. It's not even close. Wisconsin won a Big Ten championship in 2010. They won a Big Ten championship in 2011 and 12. So they're just in that small little pocket. Wisconsin won a major conference 3 straight years. Miami, when is the last time Miami won a conference? And when they did, it was the awful Big East Conference that had no business being part of the BCS. The Big East was a joke. And so Miami wasn't a joke. They owned the Big East, and they were a national player at the time. But the conference was a joke. When you had the likes of UConn advancing to the Fiesta Bowl as a BCS team out of the Big East at 7-5, well, that's a joke. So, Dennis, no. All right. Cheryl Jensen joining us here. Cheryl, welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Thank you for joining the live chat here. Is there any Miami fans here crying? I dealt with a lot of them during the national championship game against my Buckeyes. Whole lot of crying was going on that day. Oh boy, Cheryl's going somewhere where we don't want to go right now. Looks like Baylor made a big play against Vandy, which is good news for me. Okay. Nicholas Powell, I'm a Miami fan, but Wisconsin has been better than us for some time now. Yes. And that's nothing to be embarrassed by. That's just the way it is. You can still have a proud football tradition, and certainly Miami fans can claim we are better all time. Make that claim. It's easy to make against Wisconsin. You have the rings on your fingers for national championships. You had dominant teams almost every year from 1983 through 94, and then a little bit of a gap, and then those early 2000 teams with Butch Davis and Larry Coker. Wisconsin is nothing to compare to that. But in the last 15 years, Wisconsin has been decidedly better. Now, I'm not talking about they've been Ohio State and Miami's been Kansas. No, it's like that. But it's decided. It's not arguable. I'm going to guess that over the last 15 years, that Wisconsin, off the top of my head, has won roughly 70% of its games, and Miami more like in the high 50 percentile, like 55, 58% of its games. Wisconsin in the last 15 years has finished ranked 11 or 12 times, and Miami 4 or 5 times. Wisconsin has finished ranked much higher than Miami on a regular basis. They have gone to Rose Bowls. They have won Rose Bowls. They've gone to Cotton Bowls and major bowl games over and over and over and over. And when they haven't gone to a major bowl game, they've gone to well-respected, just under the New Year's Six or BCS line of bowl games. A lot of Citrus Bowls, Outback Bowls, Capital One Bowls, very good bowl games. They've been not lingering or languishing in the Sun Bowl category like Miami has been. Miami, says Jamie, will be a natty team when they are getting 20 of the top 30 South Florida players every year. Well, if they can do that, they probably would. Sean Duffy, if the Big Ten has another 7-1 type bowl season, will they leave a Big Ten one-loss champion out of the playoff again? Well, Sean, apparently that has nothing to do with the two things. The College Football Playoff Committee could look at the Big Ten and say that's the best conference, but they did not produce one of the 4 best teams. Those are two. I agree with you. I want to see the conference champions in the playoff. I want something done with Notre Dame, and I want something done with non-conference champions making the field. They should not be in the field when the field is this small. When the field expands, let them in. And we've covered that ground a number of times. I've certainly proposed my playoff system of 8 teams. I would love to see 16. If player injury and health was not a factor, 16 would be beautiful, And I'm not talking about 16 Power 5 teams. I'm talking about 16 across the board. We would include all the conference champions. Cheryl went to 7-1 last year. No respect for the Big Ten. So I get what you guys are saying, and I totally agree that the Big Ten is arguably the best conference. I believe right now that the SEC is, and I think the SEC clearly had the best season, but that the Big Ten had the second best season. You cannot point to any SEC game outside of the conference this year in which the SEC was embarrassed in any way. None. No games. The only ones would be Arkansas, who is the worst team in the SEC, did lose to North Texas, and they lost to Colorado State. Outside of that, the SEC, the games that they lost were very understandable. Tennessee lost to West Virginia. West Virginia was almost the best team in the Big 12. Tennessee was way down in the SEC. LSU beat Miami. Auburn beat Washington. Alabama beat Louisville. On and on. They won all their big non-conference games for the most part. The SEC by far played better outside the conference than any other conference. But your point is well taken. Yes, the Big Ten has played extremely well outside the conference the last 2 years, and even before that. But you could have the best conference and not necessarily one of the 4 best teams, and that's what the committee is claiming. I don't know. I don't like how the committee is approaching the playoff. Alabama should not have been in last year, and I don't care that they won the national championship, and I picked them to win the national championship once they made the playoff. So I'm not talking best team. I'm not arguing best team, but the champions need to be in. Otherwise, why do we have conferences? Number one. And then I can make a bunch of other arguments of why we have conferences and why the champions of the conferences should be in, because the conferences play in silos. They don't play enough non-conference games for us to get a good read on how good the conferences are and how substantial those second and third place teams are. Therefore, you go with representation. You only make it fair that all the conferences, or at least under this format with the 4 teams and 5 conferences, that you eliminate the worst of the conference champions and let the rest of the conferences be represented. Did anyone prove to be better than Ohio State outside the Big Ten this year? No, it was not proven. Ohio State lost a game within the Big Ten. Big deal. So did Oklahoma. So did Alabama last year. So did Clemson last year and the year before. So did almost every team. If I hear another person say, well, for Ohio State who complains, or whoever complains in a particular year, and it's not just about Ohio State, it's about TCU and Baylor the first year in 2014. It's about Penn State. It's about other teams as well. And it's, of course, about Central Florida. That's a whole other deal. If I hear another person say, well, if you're going to complain about it, then just don't lose any games. That's not the standard for all these other teams. Clemson loses games and makes the playoff. Oklahoma loses games, makes the playoff. Alabama loses games, makes the playoff. That's not the standard. If that was the standard, then we would just take whatever team didn't lose any games and they would play a playoff. So if it was 4 teams, they'd play a playoff. If it was 3 teams, we'd have to rank them, and then there would have to be a bye. If it was 1 team, we'd say, well, we don't have a playoff this year. We only have 1 team that went undefeated, and they're going to be the national champion. We don't have to play another game. So I have a bunch of people coming at me all the time saying, well, you should go undefeated then. You shouldn't complain about it. Just take care of business and go undefeated. Well, that hasn't been the standard. That's not the standard. 14 of the 14, excuse me. So we've had 5 playoffs. Therefore, we've had 20 teams make the playoff. 14 of the 20 teams that have made the playoff have lost a game. So that's not the standard. Sean Duffy, Wisconsin was bad until Barry Alvarez got there, which was in 1989. So yes, that's true. They were awful in the 70s and 80s. They were good in the 60s. They were awful in the 70s and 80s. And then it took Barry Alvarez a couple years. Mark, was Ohio State the favorite versus Clemson in the 2016 playoff? I believe they were. I believe the point spread was 2 or 3. Cheryl, I agree. The Buckeyes should have never lost to Purdue. It was their fault. Yeah, certainly. So I had no issue, and I said this all week leading into the playoff decision, that I had no issue with Oklahoma being selected over Ohio State, although I didn't think it was fair, that I could make a case for Ohio State playing a more difficult schedule, having better wins, that Oklahoma also struggled for the to counter the Maryland 52-51 game. Oklahoma had its Oklahoma State 48-47 game at home, in which Oklahoma State could have converted a 2-point play and beaten them. They had their Army game in overtime. So Oklahoma had plenty of examples of almost getting upset. But of course, their loss was not as bad as Ohio State's loss. So the committee had to have a tiebreaker, and that apparently was the tiebreaker. So the committee being in that predicament, I understand their decision. They went with worst loss is out. But I don't think it should come down to that. If you're 12-1 and won a major conference, and somebody else went 12-1 and won a major conference, there shouldn't be a distinction between those two standards. You should both be in a playoff. Not Purdue blew out Ohio State. Well, Oklahoma got to avenge its loss. Well, Ohio State can't help that it didn't get to avenge its loss. If that's criteria for the playoff, then what we need to do is say, okay, Purdue, strap up the gear. We've scheduled a game for 3 days from now. You're going to play Ohio State again because we want to see if they can avenge that loss. If we're going to make that criteria, then we need to set up those games so that everybody can be measured equally, because that's idiotic to give one team a pass to say, well, they kind of canceled this loss by beating this team, but the other team didn't get to cancel its loss because they didn't get to play that team again. If anything, that team wasn't good enough to make that rematch in the championship game in the conference. Absolutely, Army's not a joke. I get that. But Army, you understand, James, that Army is not a Power 5 11-win team. Yes, they played well against Houston. They scored a zillion points. They played well against Oklahoma. They took them to overtime. Yes, but Army is not an 11-win team like a Power 5 11-win team. They're a Group of 5 team. They would win 6 or 7 games in a Power 5 league. So that would have been another ugly loss or ugly near loss for Oklahoma. If Army played in the Big Ten and was 6-6 and Oklahoma was taken to overtime by Army, we'd be saying that's an ugly game. No, I understand that Army's, no, they're not bad. They're a good team, but they're like a top 40 or 50 team. I know they're going to get ranked, but they're not that good. All right. A lot of bias on the committee, probably. James, that was not my point. So Jamie, who I believe is an Oregon fan, I sometimes get you guys confused. I apologize if you're not, makes the statement here that big wins should count more than they just look at the losses. I think that's what he's saying. And I drove home that point at this point last year over and over and over and over again. So I'll say it one more time. What was the game that was recited more than any other game in college football at the end of last season? It wasn't even close. Iowa 55, Ohio State 24. That was the reason Ohio State missed the playoff. And yes, they should take a beating for the beating that they took against a 7-5 Iowa team. I get that. But if you're going to hold that criteria to losses, then you should hold that criteria to wins and make the statement that Ohio State beat a quality top 15, 10-3 Michigan State team 48-3. So they put down a beating on a really good team, and Alabama didn't have a game like that. Who did Alabama beat in the top 15, 48-3? What was the Alabama equivalent of the Ohio State beatdown of Michigan State? There wasn't one. But did anybody other than me say that or make that argument or point? No. Everybody just said Iowa 55, Ohio State 24. And yes, that should be weighed heavily. And even though I thought Ohio State should have been selected last year, I understood the Alabama decision. I didn't think it was just absolutely crazy. It was similar to the Ohio State decision over Penn State the year before. In my estimation, in my approach, Ohio State would be selected as a Big Ten champion over Alabama because, number one, they were the Big Ten champion and Alabama did not win a conference championship. Number two, Ohio State had better wins. But all I have to do is go back to number one, because in my system, we would only be looking at conference champions if we only had a 4-team playoff. Once we go to 8 teams, then we do different things and we allow wild cards. And then the year before, the same thing. I certainly understood why Ohio State was selected. They only had 1 loss, much like Alabama the next year, versus Penn State having 2 losses. Plus, they had a better resume than Penn State. But Penn State was the Big Ten champion, and they won head-to-head. Therefore, I would have selected Penn State over Ohio State. I understood why Ohio State was selected in 2016 and Bama in 2017. I just didn't agree with it. What part of Connecticut am I from, Maurice? Well, I try not to say that I'm from Connecticut. I'm from Ohio. I was born in Chicago. I lived a couple of years in New Jersey because my dad worked for Goodyear and we moved around a little bit. So I lived the first couple of years of my life in Chicago. Then we moved to New Jersey. And then we moved to Ohio when I was about 5. And I grew up in Ohio. I've been in Connecticut. I was going to say Kent State because that's where I went to college. I have been in Connecticut for the past 17 years because of my job. But I'm not from Connecticut. Nothing against the Nutmeg State, but clearly I am not from Connecticut. Yes, Daniel. Army almost beat Oklahoma. They went to overtime. All right. Sahil asks, Mark, do you think Hornibrook starts next year? I think it should be a competition based on what I've seen of Cone and based on what I've seen of Hornibrook, who I don't think improved this year. That was another hope for Wisconsin this year, is that the Hornibrook we saw in the Orange Bowl last year that threw 4 touchdown passes and threw for about $260 and went like 24 for 34. I'm kind of making up stats, but that's in the ballpark. That we were going to see continued progression and he was going to stop making the scattershot throws on a consistent basis because he's got throwing talent. He's got arm talent, but he just didn't progress this year. And he had the receivers coming back, Davis and Taylor and Pryor, to help him. There should have been more continuity in the passing game for Wisconsin this year, but there wasn't. So since we didn't see that improvement from Hornibrook, I certainly think that the competition should be wide open. But I trust Paul Chryst to do the wise thing. Amadou X Pro, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. I think Mark explained his feelings with how it should have been handled at Miami, but it's really who's going to hand the ball off to that stud running back. Clemson has not been favored in a bowl game since 2012 until this year. They are favored over Notre Dame, which is a great point. 2012. So they were an underdog against LSU, Ohio State, even Oklahoma the year that they killed the Sooners. And then I guess they were an underdog against Oklahoma in the college football playoff in 2015. I can't understand that. And I think that one made me quite a bit of money. Then, of course, against Alabama. and then against Ohio State in the playoffs in 2016, then against Alabama in the championship game, and then last year against Alabama. All right, folks, I am going to shut down, but I've got a few things to say real quick. If you want to hang on, if you don't, certainly it's a free country. So I see a lot of new people here on the live chat, so I appreciate it. I love the core group of people that I have that have been with me for a long time, that have supported me and encouraged me, and so it's great to see the old guys and the old names in here. But man, I love seeing a whole lot of fresh blood in the live chat. So thanks so much for joining us. I hope you had a great Christmas or whatever version of holiday that you celebrate. That you had a great time with family and friends and loved ones. And Happy New Year to you as well. And I'll be here talking college football each and every day. There are a number of happenings surrounding Mark Rogers TV that I can't go into right now. Some unfortunate circumstances that I have to deal with. I would ask, if you love college football and if you have any interest in my channel here, that you would subscribe to my newsletter, The Voice of College Football. So please just send your email to mine. I promise to not clutter up your inbox. I will only send the one mailing per week. And also think about it. Yes, I will have your email address, but you will have my email address as well. So it's a fair trade-off. So I'm not going to do anything crazy with your email. I'm a very honest person. So just send me your email address to MarkRogersTV@gmail.com, and I will send you the weekly newsletter, The Voice of College Football, which basically is just my take on college football. A lot of stats, facts, and trends, updates on the channel. And it's important, especially going forward, for a number of reasons. So we're facing a number of challenges here that I can't go into, but in regards to the continuance, that's not a word. The continued status of the channel. So thank you so much. And for anybody that's joined us for a first time or just stumbling upon us just here in the last few days, I think you get the idea that we talk college football and we try to do it for the hardcore smart fan. And I'm not perfect. My analysis is not perfect. It's flawed, but it's not seriously flawed. It's logical. It comes from a base of knowledge and watching the game for a long time and knowing football and working in the TV industry and the sports TV industry at the highest levels for a long, long time, longer than I would like to admit. So this only works because you guys chime in and you guys provide your analysis and your thoughts and your feelings and your vibe, as well as just me. So I'm the voice of college football, but basically, even beyond that, we are the voice of college football. It's your voice. You've got a voice. I've got a voice. And we bring on the voice of the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the nation. So again, if you're stumbling upon Mark Rogers TV, maybe for the first time, or you've only checked out a few videos, look through the videos and you can see that we provide what we feel is top-notch debate, discussion, and analysis, even throughout the off season. Rankings and ratings and recruiting updates, and we do everything you conceivable. We rank the conferences, we rank the players, we rank the schedules, we do historic analysis, everything right here at Mark Rogers TV. And even though right now I know that Vandy is up, I think 10-7 or 10-3 or something like that. What is it? 14-3, 14-10. That I'm even, because I love college football, got this on DVR. I'm going to start it over and I'm going to break this one down as well. I try to both preview and predict, and then also provide instant analysis and recapping of all the bowl games. I don't get to all of them just because I've got a job and I've got all sorts of other stuff going on, but I get to as many as possible. And hopefully my prediction record will hold. 12-1 in bowl play right now, and 11-3 against the spread. And with Baylor scoring, that's a good thing for me. So they just scored to take what should be a 3-point lead. I've got Baylor in 4.5. Vandy, I believe, will win the game. Oh, we got James here chiming in. Miami football since 1929 all time has won 66.7% of its games. Wisconsin, 58.4% since 1889. Okay. That wasn't my point, but that's interesting. Since World War II, it's been a tug of war between Ohio State and Oklahoma as to the best record and winning percentage in college football. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And if you do any shopping, let's say you do some post-Christmas shopping, you will help out the channel immensely if you do me this one favor. Go into the comments section, the description section, I should say, description section of any of the videos. Grab one of the Amazon links, use that to enter the site. Ignore the product. The product does not matter. You don't need to buy the product. Do your shopping as you normally would, buy whatever you want. Just use one of those links and you will be contributing to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And I believe there's some kind of function on here that's called a super chat in which you can donate as well. And that may be very important going forward as I try to launch this. Oh, if you guys only knew what was going on with my life and my career right now. But I will have to disclose that at a later date because there are a lot of complications involving things and things that I can't control and my own professional existence and what I'm able to do here because of other professional obligations and policies, we'll say. All right. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Why do I call myself that? It's because you called me that. So thank you for naming me the voice of college football. I wear it proudly because of you. And we will provide the analysis throughout the weekend of all the big bowl games. And hey, DeAndre said there are not bowl games that are getting him excited. Michigan State, Oregon, Auburn, Purdue, Utah, Northwestern, even besides the college football playoff games and the New Year's Six games. I love those games. South Carolina, Virginia, I'm going to be in it. I am going to be on this, as I always am. There are over 8,000 videos posted to this channel. We do college football like nobody else. So would ask that you would like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you very soon with more analysis and college football take. I would love to be able to adhere to the schedule. You may see on my YouTube channel that I've got a live stream schedule. And for months and months and months, I was able to adhere to and hit that schedule like clockwork. I'm no longer able to do that. And that's why the live streams are a bit hit and miss. But I will try to get you as much early notification as possible. And I appreciate the support and I appreciate your encouragement more than I can explain. I do a poor job of explaining, describing, communicating to you how much I appreciate you supporting the channel, supporting me, and I can't repay that. So thank you so much. We aim to deliver the best in college football coverage, and we do it for you. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We will see you soon. And I'm going to check out the live chat to see if there's anything I missed. And again, thanks for all the kind words. See you next time.